Hello, and welcome to episode 23 of Unlimited Opinions. This is the third time I'm starting this podcast. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
Today we are talking about early modern knowledge, so epistemology.
What'd you say? Watch your mouth.
You made that same joke like 15 episodes ago.
That's correct.
Yes.
It doesn't get old.
It does. So epistemology, so what we can and cannot do, can and cannot know, so the limits of human knowledge.
That is correct. So what do you think are the limits of human knowledge, or should we wait till the end of this podcast?
I think we should wait till the end. But before we begin, I just want to say, follow us on Twitter.
Have we had anybody make a comment yet?
No, we have not.
That's interesting.
I have had someone from school say they were going to, but they have not yet. Capital U, lowercase LMTD, capital O opinions. That is our Twitter handle.
I just took a sip out of my Lord of the Rings mug.
Yes, I have my Lord of the Rings mug over here, too.
I'm drinking an ale.
I'm drinking unsweet tea.
Schlafly's Pale Ale, the best ale this side of the Prancing Pony.
That's a good reference.
Which sounds suspiciously like a gay bar.
Well.
Oh, Sam.
All right.
That was my Frodo impression.
Yeah, I understood.
My least favorite character in all the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, Frodo.
You just don't like the actor.
I don't know. I don't think.
Do you not like Frodo as a character?
Well, I guess it kind of melds in there. But no, I don't really like Frodo as a character.
Why not?
He's kind of a whiny bitch. Sam's as we talked about before. Sam's the true hero.
Well, no, not necessarily, but okay.
Or maybe Gollum.
Okay. I would not call Gollum a hero, but
he's one of the heroes.
I disagree.
Really? You don't think he is heroic, like a tragic hero?
No, I think he's just tragic.
But he leads them into Mordor.
Yeah, in order to kill them.
Well, not at first.
Well, at first, yes,
After
but then not at second, but then yes at third.
Yeah, ultimately,
yes.
Yeah. Right. But
I would not call him a
he
hero.
had psychological problems.
Well, yeah. I wouldn't call him a hero.
Yeah, but I mean, he really overcame a lot to get to where he was.
I guess he killed people. Like a lot of people.
How many?
Well, I don't know. He killed Deagle.
That's one.
That's one. And then a whole bunch of goblins, which I guess doesn't count. But
yeah.
I don't know. We don't really know.
We're going to start counting goblins.
Yeah.
What's his name? Thrain? No. Thorin.
Thorin.
Son of Thrain. Murdered many, many goblins.
Yes.
All right. Well,
all right.
I digress.
That's enough Lord of the Rings talk for right now.
We know that Frodo is a terrible character.
We do not. Moving on to Montaigne's skepticism. So Montaigne adopted this idea of Pyrrhonian skepticism. So nothing at all could be known if the senses are not reliable. So there's no such thing as knowledge. So he believes that the senses are completely unreliable. So we really can't know anything because in order to know things, we have to look through our senses, but we can't trust our senses ever.
And I guess part of this discussion, a lot of this discussion, I just don't care about.
Really?
It's a reason why I got kind of soured on the study of philosophy, because it's just talking about words a lot. But I mean, really, I guess it all depends on this whole discussion depends on what you mean by knowledge,
mm-hmm.
as opposed to like understanding or wisdom or judgment. And I guess, and so they seem to get tied up in knots about what is truly knowledge, meaning like you could have it without doubt, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you define knowledge as it relates to this discussion with Montaigne?
As it relates to this discussion, well, Montaigne would say anything that we kind of know through experience, because he kind of believes that, knowledge is basically all derived from our senses. So anything we can see, taste, touch, hear, smell.
Right.
But in a way, we can't trust any of that.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it becomes meaningless.
Well, he even makes the problem even more of a problem because he says that reason is just as false as sense. So really kind of going even back further, like kind of down the rabbit hole, if we can't trust any of the knowledge, we can't make any sort of reason. So reason in and of itself does not exist if sense does not exist. So we really have no way of knowing anything, basically.
So you're a fan of Montaigne?
I am not at all.
He's like one of the ancient skeptics, isn't he?
Yes.
Like he can't know anything.
I do not like the skeptics.
All right. So we're going then to Descartes.
Yes,
Descartes. Or do you want to talk about Montaigne anymore?
I just did want to mention that he kind of believed that sometimes animals can have more sense than humans, with just different sorts of sense of the environment. So, who's to say, which sense is really the best sense? So he kind of believes that, just because of our perception, our knowledge, that doesn't make us any better than animals.
Right, like an eagle can see further, so why do we say that they aren't better than us?
Yeah, exactly.
In some ways, people would say animals are more pure than us, have the sin, so to speak. Innocent, too. All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so then Descartes' response, he kind of believes that the simplest elements of basically anything, extension, shape, size, number, place, and time, they must be real, so we can trust, the sort of sciences of arithmetic and geometry. And the reason he believes that these must be real is because they're kind of like separate from sense in a way. Like that's just something that we don't necessarily... I don't know how to really describe it here. Maybe if I look back at the book.
They're separate concepts from experience. They're universals,
yes.
Right? Isn't that really what he's talking about?
Yes, exactly.
And so it doesn't matter what the physical reality is. Those things exist in their own conception.
Yes.
Whether they exist in reality and physical space is a different question.
Yeah, so that's hence his big theory of cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am.
Right.
So really, in the process of thought, I prove that I exist because, if I didn't exist, where would this thought come from? Kind of that similar frame of thinking for those, principal elements of, time and space and that sort of thing, because, they're kind of housed in thought. And so in order for them to exist at all, they have to be thought of.
Right.
Yes.
Good explanation.
Thank you. He also says that to doubt is itself to think. So anybody who kind of tries to disprove his cogito ergo sum is in of themselves proving his cogito ergo sum, because you cannot doubt something without first thinking about it. And if you're thinking about it, then that automatically proves him right.
That is correct.
Yes. I don't know. I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Pretty good argument.
So I do like
you can't argue with me, because if you argue with me, I am still right. Ha-ha!
But Descartes does kind of admit that this really only proves the existence of the mind,
right.
And that these things do exist in the mind. So we can't really prove with those that anything in the material world exists, but we can use them to kind of prove that the foundation of the material world exists, at least in our understanding. So he kind of says, well, it doesn't really matter if we really know if any of these other things exist, because they exist in our concepts, and that should be good enough, basically.
Right. It's basically like, never mind.
Yeah.
I
guess, yeah.
I mean, that's the way I view it. Yeah. Moving along.
Cartesian consciousness. So Descartes kind of moves on to, what it means to kind of be aware and to think in and of itself. So he says that thinking is intellectual meditation, volition, emotion, pain, pleasure, mental images, and sensation. So he kind of lumps basically all of our mental processes into thinking and these items of consciousness. So everything is kind of wrapped up. Basically, everything we do is wrapped up in thinking within our consciousness. And then he also says that ideas are the mental counterparts of words. So basically, anytime I say, the word lion, you kind of get this mental image of a lion in your head without, really having to think about it too much. It's just there kind of in your mind. And that's what he would define an idea as, kind of that mental image when you think of something. And so with these ideas, he kind of breaks them into three categories. There's innate ideas. And so he puts forth three of these that are just kind of innate in our mind. They are thing, truth, and thought. So they're kind of things that we all just have a distinct understanding of without having to experience them, without having to reason through them. Those are just things we understand. We understand thing, truth, and thought. And he also says that there are acquired ideas, and so those originate from external objects. Those are kind of the things we determine through our senses, and also from like hearing about it from other people. And then he believes that there are devised ideas, which are the creations of oneself. So, sort of mythological creatures, things that we can't see ourselves, but we can still picture within our mind. Those are still ideas. They still exist in our mind, even if they don't exist in the real world.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, I'm going a little off track, but evidence, when I try a case, there are three categories of evidence. And I have to go through this with a jury, and it helps a lot to talk about this a little bit. But there's testimony, there's exhibits, and then there's reasonable inferences that you draw from the exhibits. And this kind of reminds me of that, where you devise by myself as a third category, and that's basically the reasonable inferences that you draw from the other things that exist on their own. I do want to backtrack, because I forgot to mention in his discussion about, whether God exists.
I was going to get to that, yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
No, he mentions the evil God theory. or trickster God, like a God that because his whole theory about the existence of God is that there's something beyond me that I didn't create, so there must be a creator that created me and created everything else. And then the question was posed, well, what if you're just being tricked? Well, then so his response to that, well, then there is that creator that is trying to trick me. He still exists, even if I'm being fooled about the existence of that person because I'm not the one thinking of that trick.
Yeah, but he eventually kind of discards that idea because his whole understanding of the existence of God is that this conception of a perfect being.
Right, which I don't follow. I think it's better just to say that there's some things that you don't like. It's like I think it's a better example to say, how can I be surprised by something? Like the fact that I'm surprised by things in existence or things that happen would prove to me that I didn't create it.
Yeah.
That there's something else out there. So there's the existence of something beyond my mind because I didn't create these things that surprise me.
But his whole proof for God is basically that, he has this idea of a perfect, infinite being, and there's no way that a finite, imperfect, inherently flawed human being could ever think of that without that idea kind of being given to him by God itself. And that's kind of where he believes that God is not a deceiver, is not a trickster, because in order for God to exist, he must be perfect, and not being deceptive is part of perfection.
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I hope that's true, but
yeah.
it would. I think the same argument would go. I have a concept of a truly evil God, and so what could have given me that concept except for the truly evil God that exists that wants to push his evil upon everything? Yeah. I mean, it seems like the same reasoning applies to the evil God as it would be a good God.
And kind of Kenny kind of admits that, in that kind of the I think, therefore I am. You can kind of replace any sort of thing with that I think.
Right. I ride a bicycle, therefore I am.
Yeah.
I do this, any activity, therefore I am. Right.
So it's kind of that same thing. So it's, you can really only prove that your mind exists.
Correct.
Really.
Yeah. And I think when you're talking about the level of certainty as to what exists, I think that's the only thing we could be 100% certain of is that our mind exists. And then defining what the mind is a whole different thing. Because what if we're just like the simulation?
Does it really matter if anything else exists if we know that our mind exists?
In what sense do you mean matter?
Because, you could kind of like go down that path and be like, well, nothing else exists, so what's the point of me even living?
Right.
So it's like, well, why wouldn't you live? If everything is inside your mind, why not still just do whatever?
Right.
It doesn't have any impact on anyone else, so keep doing what you're doing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you don't want to end the world.
Yeah.
You want to keep.
You don't want to find out the hard way.
That's right. And how do we know that we don't live forever? We don't really know that.
Yeah. Well, that's actually a discussion that's kind of talked about later.
Yeah.
So keep listening.
Yeah. Sorry, I got a little got off track. Where were we at?
Descartes consciousness. Yes. So he also then brings up these lessons of nature, and there's two of these. The first is that I have a body, and then second, my body has an environment of other bodies. So he kind of says that he's kind of saying we do have to kind of trust our senses here for a little bit, because I can kind of prove that I have a body if I trust my senses because I feel pain. But if I did not have a body, there'd be no way for me to feel pain and that sort of thing. Because if I was just a completely mental thing, why else would I feel pain if not through a body? And he also says that my body has an environment of other bodies. So, if my body exists, then these other bodies have to exist necessarily within the world, essentially. So that's kind of his proof for everything else existing.
I think you can feel pain without a body, just like what people are amputees. They still have, what do they call those, ghost pains, like in their feet. They don't have feet, but they feel as if there's pain in their feet because the nerve endings or whatever the case may be. So if this was a simulation, if we were in the Matrix, and there's a computer program that says feel pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of like a levels of knowledge, I guess I'd say, and that's where I kind of get bored with the discussion because it's like, okay, what's the point of even talking about what the level of knowledge is? Let's talk about, how to assess it logically as opposed to whether it exists. It has to be, there's certain assumptions in life. And I think they're trying to create a system where there's no assumptions. And I don't think there's any way to do that. There's going to be an assumption that you exist, or maybe you can reason that. There's going to be assumptions that other humans are independent actors with their own free will. I don't think you can prove that they're not automatons.
So, I mean, what's the point of even arguing that nothing else exists? Because if you're making
Correct.
that argument, who are you arguing to?
Right.
So
Right.
it's like, why even bother?
Correct. That's where I got my study of philosophy.
Yeah.
Why are we even talking about the extent of knowledge? It doesn't really. It seems like a waste of time.
Yeah.
It's a interesting theoretical discussion. If you got nothing better to do.
Yeah.
But it's interesting for somebody who wants to study linguistics. I guess
It's kind of interesting.
I'm gonna talk you out of that major before we're done.
Moving on to the empiricism of Hobbes, unless there's something else you wanted to add about Descartes.
No, I don't want to add anything.
All right, so Hobbes believed that we have these conceptions, and all of these conceptions are rooted in experiences of the senses. So he's very much we can trust our senses. There's no reason not to.
Right.
Very much kind of what you're saying. We have to just kind of assume that they are not leading us astray all the time. And he also says that thoughts are always mental images derived from sensation. So what we sense through this sensation, we can produce an mental image that we can recall at a later time. So everything's basically through experience. And he says that sensation is a passive affair. So sensation is essentially the occurrence of an image or fancy in the mind. So when we sense something, what we're really doing is we're kind of producing this mental image of this thing that we're sensing, that we're touching, that we're smelling. Is we're producing a mental image of what is producing that sensation.
I think that's an accurate description. Don't you think?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. But it's almost a discussion of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to knowledge. But I
Yeah.
guess there's a lot of overlap.
I guess so.
Because what is our mind? What is our mental ability anyway, other than like a study of psychology
Mm-hmm.
and psychiatry? Anyway, how we think and how our mind functions or doesn't.
But he does kind of separate these mental images like from the things themselves, because he says that all of our images could remain the same even if the world were annihilated. So even if everything were to be destroyed, everything just disappeared in an instant, we would still have those images of those things. So the image does not equal the thing itself. It is something different, something that we have formed through our sensation of that thing.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Okay.
And then he also...
Granted.
Yeah.
Now what? I don't know.
And he also states that language separates us from animals. So he believes that that's the key thing that kind of separates us from animals, our ability to look at things, to name them, and then with those names, come up with a mental image of that thing purely based on that word.
And that's refuted by the chimpanzees now that they could teach sign language to. And he'd be like, oh, dang.
Well, actually...
What about birds? What about birds with their songs? And dolphins?
Well, that's just repetition with birds, I think.
I don't know. They communicate. Say, hey, baby.
But they
come
can't.
on
They
over
can only
here.
teach it to a certain extent.
Look at my feathers.
Right.
I mean, isn't that really what the male birds are doing?
Well, yeah, but the
Or warning other.
we can only teach
rivals.
like so much language to gorillas. They've found because they can't effectively understand grammar. They can understand like simple commands and simple nouns and that sort of thing.
Well, maybe we're not teaching gorilla right. I mean, really? I mean, because if you look at the grammar of Latin or ancient Greek, it's different than the English grammar.
Yeah.
And there are some concepts that we've talked about earlier that were difficult for them to communicate because of the nature of their language. Maybe we just need to start earlier with a better gorilla language.
I guess.
I mean, why not? Why isn't that the solution to that problem? Why is it their problem? Why is it their fault and not our fault?
Because they just simply cannot grasp, the full effective language. Because they tried this, like I was talking, I think last episode or the episode before, when people are isolated from a very young age, they can't learn language to a certain point. They kind of develop
Good point.
only to that certain point of kind of where they're at with the gorillas, where they can't understand that full complexity of grammar. They can understand, basic commands, basic like subject, verb, and that's basically it as far as language development goes. So there is a distinct, kind of roadblock there if you're not, taught language.
It makes
from the very
sense.
beginning. Yeah.
It's a good argument.
Yes.
Moving along.
So it reminds me of this very funny video of this gorilla that they taught, that kind of basic sign language thing, and its longest sentence. I'll have to find the video later. Its longest sentence ever recorded was something like "Me want banana, want hungry, want eat banana, want hungry, eat banana, banana, want eat." And so that was the longest sentence ever recorded by a gorilla. And it was just that. It was like a good solid 10 seconds of like "Me want banana, hungry, eat." It's pretty great.
It sounds like your youngest brother Eli
Yes.
on a Saturday morning,
Yes. That's very true.
which you will say out loud. Me want banana. Hungry, eat banana.
Moving on to John Locke and his ideas.
And he would say that with one banana in each hand.
Yes, he really likes bananas. So Locke believed that an idea is whatever it is which the mind can be employed about in thinking. So he kind of expands this, idea of an idea to basically, whatever we're thinking about can be an idea. And he says that there's an inborn natural capacity for thinking and understanding. So understanding is kind of what sets men above the rest of sensible beings. Is this basically this innate ability to understand. So, even though, infants cannot reason through, the truths of philosophy and everything, we do have this capacity from the get-go to learn these things eventually. And that's kind of what sets us apart from everything else.
Yeah, makes sense. I like how he goes on where he's talking about that experience is necessary to provide us with the concepts that make up the propositions that he's talking about. You have to have the experience in order to get the concepts, and that's how they are created.
Because he also does say that there's really no principle, there's no like universal principles which every single person can assent to. So he kind of strikes this down, this idea of sort of the, the kind of innate virtues, because he kind of points to things such as, every parent cares for their child, and he kind of points to other civilizations. Yeah, which I know is something that I thought of you when I read that, because he kind of points to these other civilizations that really do just kind of abandon their children. And so you could point to very many examples of that sort of thing. So he kind of goes against this whole, there's this innate care that we all have.
Right. Well, the human sacrifice societies and all that. And yes, I agree with that analysis.
And he also says that we get many ideas from more than one sense. So a lot of times our senses kind of have to work together, work jointly to produce a full idea of something. And then he says that qualities are the powers to produce ideas in us. And so he points out these two different types of qualities. There are primary qualities, which are perceptible by more than one sense, and there are secondary qualities, which are perceptible only by a single sense. He says that only primary qualities are inseparable from their possessors, and then secondary qualities are nothing but a power to produce sensations in us. So he kind of says that, any truths that we have to be founded on primary qualities that are kind of backed up by more than one sense, backed up by more than one thing, whereas secondary qualities are just like, this is what this smells like, this is what color this is. So they're really not too important in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, but I don't know where that gets us.
Neither do I.
It just kind of explains how we categorize things, and there are concepts and there are things that are derived from those concepts, like categories, or it's kind of like your analysis of a species, and these species are part of this genus and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's just, I think, in a way, stating the obvious. Don't you think?
Yeah,
am I
kind of agree.
Maybe I'm not missing. I don't know.
Spinoza on degrees of knowledge.
Spinoza.
Yeah,
so he's hungry for ice cream. What isn't Spinoza a Italian ice cream?
It's gelato.
Oh.
It's nowhere close. That doesn't even work. You made that same joke last time.
Neapolitan? Yeah, that's what it was.
I guess.
Do you like Neapolitan?
Yeah, Neapolitan.
It's like it doesn't have like the
strawberry vanilla chocolate.
No, that's not Neapolitan.
Yeah, it is.
Neapolitan is, I think, cherry instead of strawberry.
Oh.
But people don't like the cherry, and so Neapolitan has become strawberry chocolate vanilla.
So it's strawberry chocolate vanilla.
Not really, but go ahead.
Okay.
The true form.
So Spinoza points out these four different types of knowledge. He says knowledge by hearsay, so learning from somebody else what somebody else says. Knowledge from crude experience, which is basically knowledge through our senses. Knowledge where the essence of something is inferred from the essence of another, but not adequately. And the example
reasonable inferences.
Yeah, the example he gives is like the sun. We know that the sun is much bigger than it actually is, even though it doesn't seem to be that way to us. And then he also says knowledge of things by their essences. So kind of that, almost that sort of innate idea, that direct kind of concept, that immediate grasp of something.
Right, like geometry, like shortest distance between 2 points is a line, that kind of stuff. Right. More of a theoretical concept.
He says that he differs from Locke in saying that concepts and propositions are inseparable in ideas. So you need this concept and this proposition for an idea to exist. So a concept is kind of, an idea of something, and then a proposition is an idea that something is blank. So, I can have an idea of a triangle, that is the concept, and then the proposition is a triangle is a shape that has three sides. And I kind of need both of those to form that mental image. You can't have one without the other, which might be kind of just sort of common sense too.
Right.
He also says that truth is its own criterion. So you don't need to prove truth. And I didn't really understand what he was talking about here. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit.
Do you find the term criterion offensive now that you've completed a season of debate? I don't even like the word criterion anymore.
Yeah, I feel that exact same way.
I
so
have a hostility towards anyone using the term criterion.
Yes. So story time for all of our listeners here. I competed at the state Misha debate tournament at my prom, my senior prom. It was all virtual, so I had a separate room set up right next door to the
dance hall. Dinner hall.
Dinner hall. Yeah.
Reception hall.
Yes, the reception hall.
That'd be best.
So you could hear all of the very loud music through the walls. As
is that right?
Oh yeah, it was very, very obvious. And so I'm sitting in there in the other room. Internet was not very good. Competing in the state debate tournament at my prom.
Yeah. Well, I guess in one way it's good that it was virtual. Otherwise, you would have had to skip prom because you would have been in Jeff City or Columbia or whatever it was going to be. Mm-hmm. But there is no logical reason for that to have been a virtual event.
It's pretty ridiculous.
They had football players banging into each other on football fields.
6 months
soccer,
before that,
basketball, every competition known to high school athletes,
except for cheer. Interestingly enough.
Well, I guess they just realized that cheer was unnecessary and superfluous. I mean, really. But it wasn't.
There's our cheerleader gone.
Well, I guess you're talking about competitive cheer.
Yeah, competitive cheer.
So those are athletes. Yeah. That's pretty neat stuff. Although I think anything with artistic score is not a sport, but that's a whole different subject.
Also, the music competition was also virtual.
Yeah, what the heck?
I competed in state. I got a silver award at state for that too.
Congratulations!
Yes, thank you.
But it just I think it's just that all of the debate coaches and administration are so left of center that they just panicked about the COVID virus, unlike what the football coaches do, because I'm sure some of them are left of center, but a lot of them are just performance driven and didn't worry about such things, or they evaluated the risks and the rewards for the students and decided the rewards were better. And so you're doing public speaking locked in a single room, separate from anybody else.
Had people looking at me from outside the window, though. So
that's interesting. All right,
it's actually interesting.
Rant.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up debate because it's kind of similar to like what you're talking about. Because especially when you get to the state debate, it's a lot of the technical kind of jargon.
Right.
It's almost like I'd rather just talk about the topic than talk about my mistakes in talking about the topic. Is kind of the issue
you're
that I ran
talking about
into.
Talking about the topic.
Yes, because I get a lot of times because this is our first year ever having a debate team at my high school. First time anybody's ever gone to state,
because you only had the first
figures.
year of the team.
And
so you had a coach that never had participated or had any knowledge of debate.
And so, I don't really know the whole format of everything. I figured it out kind of as I went along. But especially in the state debate, you can't bring up, new evidence past this certain point. So you should disqualify everything you said about this. And it's that sort of thing. So it's just kind of like, ugh. Just let's talk about the topic, not talk about how I'm talking about the topic. And that's kind of what we're
doing today.
That's why I brought that up.
Why I got frustrated with philosophy. And so just so our listener knows, I was your coach.
Yes.
And was successful in coaching you to qualify for the state tournament.
Yes. You did a lot.
Well, I did a little. Don't act like I didn't do anything. You bounced your ideas off of me.
That's true. That's true.
And I am... somewhat, I'd say I'm competent at persuasive arguments.
You
are. Of my own style.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only way to do it persuasively. If you try to do somebody else's style or do it fake, the audience will always pick up on it, and you shouldn't even bother. And don't worry about being liked by the crowd. Have I ever told you that?
Yes, you have several times.
You want me to share it with the listener or not?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really? Well, I realized early in my trial career, I tried to be nice and I tried to be thoughtful and pleasant because I thought, well, I need the jury to agree with me, and if they don't like me, they won't agree with me. But it came off as false, as Smeagol would say. Uses false. He would say you're false,
yeah, I think
right?
He does.
He does all the time. Don't look at me like that. You should know these things.
Okay.
And then I assisted another attorney, brilliant, kind of a savant, by the name of Keith Larner, and he is the most acerbic, downright, almost insulting person I've ever met, and he just doesn't care. And he is the most effective trial lawyer I've ever seen because he doesn't care, and people accept it because it's who he is. And I don't think I'm saying any sort of state secrets here, but he's the type of person that would, and he was, I think, independently wealthy. I know his family had money, and he would go into our lunchroom, and he would take people's lunch and eat it. He would eat their lunch. It would be marked with their name on it. And he would take it, and because he was hungry, and he'd eat their lunch. And anyway, because that's just his personality. He's kind of a strange cat. But he taught me that as long as you're true to yourself and you're honest about it, and you're doing the right thing, and you know you're doing the right thing, the jury will pick up on that as well. And it really liberated me to be myself, and I was a lot more effective after that. So to our listener, if you're going to debate or argue or do any of those kind of things, you got to know who you are. And if you're super sweet, go with it. If you're a jerk, own it. Don't be rude on purpose. Everything has to have a purpose. But anyway, moving on.
Yes.
So we kind of went down a long story there, but I think you did a very good job of arguing with your own style. You were you. You weren't trying to put on some sort of false air about you.
My lack of knowledge almost helped in some instances, because a lot of the times my opponents just didn't know what to do with me.
Correct.
Because they're very used to the very technical, here's my first point, here's my second point, here's my evidence, here's my subpoints, and I didn't have any of that. I said, here's my first topic essentially, and then I just talk for like a good 2 minutes. Here's my second point, talk for a good 2 minutes, and they don't have that strict framework that other people do.
It's much more effective speaking, and you're right, they wouldn't know what to do with it. And while you were at prom, I was forced to judge as a condition of you being in the tournament. I had to be a judge for various speakers, and I don't know if I want to talk about those or not, but for the public forum debate, which are two member teams argue about a different subject at the same time, virtually for, what was that, 4 hours? 4 hours.
That was a fun night.
That was awful. And some of them were much more effective, although not technically accurate. But the ones that just owned it and really knew the subject and were trying to be persuasive were much better than the ones that said, my criterion is this and my subsection. Oh, God, I don't need you to explain what you're going to say before you say it. Just get it out there. So, but I was probably judging them incorrectly because I didn't know I read the rule book, so I knew what they were supposed to do, but they were not effective in advocating for a position if they're talking about the rules and about the outline before they even got to anything. Yeah. Anyway, moving along to Leibniz.
Leibniz, yes. Leibniz, something like
Leibniz.
That. So he believed that ideas and motions have no interaction at all. So he kind of believed there's this very big difference between the mental side of us and the physical side of us. And they're linked only by the harmony pre-established in the mind of God. So this is a pretty old idea that we've seen in past readings. Kind of there's no connection between the mind and the body, only this kind of mystical, spiritual link. And he believed that our soul is a being, and it is the locus of ideas and reasoning. He says that the ideas of being, substance, and etc. can never be acquired through senses, so they are innate. So kind of because our soul is a being in and of itself, that's where we get these other innate ideas about being, about understanding, about these kind of innate principles, just by the fact that our soul is the kind of this separate thing that is a being itself.
And this is a bunch of hogwash. Yeah, I mean, I found this not persuasive at all, so let's not talk about it anymore.
Well, I do want to mention, I feel like I say that a lot after you say it, that we should move on. He says that much of our conscious experience is composed of tiny perceptions we have no idea of. And to that, I would kind of agree that, a lot of our thoughts kind of go unnoticed. We don't notice a lot of what goes on around us, and it's kind of just background, I guess, almost in our mind.
Those aren't even ideas then.
But I mean, if you think
thoughts.
But if you think back, like at a later point, try to recall a memory, you'll see all those things like in that memory, even though you didn't have it.
I don't remember anything that I didn't notice actively.
Really?
Do you remember things that you did not specifically notice at the time?
Well, yeah, if I remember like a view I saw like at a park or something,
Yeah, but you were looking at the view and you were paying attention to the view. Yeah. And you were actively thinking of it. But you're talking about passive, there are a lot of experiences that you have, like when you drive from here to school, You'll pass by a bunch of cars, but you're not going to notice any of them unless you think, I'm going to notice these cars. Because you won't even know how many cars. If you get to school tomorrow and somebody asks you, how many cars you pass today? You'll be like, I have no idea. A bunch? I don't know. Or if you only passed one, it might be noticeable because there's only one. And it's unusual because you usually pass more. So I don't think you remember things unless you actively thought them to begin with. Good point. Yeah. Ha-ha! I won.
All right. Berkeley on qualities and ideas. So he believed that no ideas are resemblances of objects. He believed that no idea can exist outside the mind, and ideas can't give us information about anything outside the mind, as everything is relative. So he kind of goes down this rabbit hole where he says basically, that is a really stupid face you just made.
That's exactly what I think of Berkeley, that stupid face.
Yeah.
So my viewer could... did you see that? Yeah, the viewer saw it and said, they agreed with me.
Creepy. You it almost looked like you looked at somebody. Did you see that? Looked off to the side and like, ugh, there's somebody in here? That was really freaky.
They're here in spirit, in mind and spirit, because of the concepts that we're sharing with them.
And so like I was saying, it kind of goes down this very big rabbit hole of kind of everything is relative. So it's
a lot of rabbit holes in this podcast.
There are a lot of rabbit holes.
You gotta get an exterminator.
Okay. So he kind of says, like, what if my blue is somebody else's green, that sort of thing. So we really cannot trust our senses at all. We cannot, trust these...
Well, I agree with that, by the way, because there's nothing to establish that my green is not your blue.
Yeah.
But we're going to call it the same name. Like, so I'm seeing green, but we call it blue. Mm-hmm. But I'm seeing green and you're seeing blue, but we both know it is blue because blue is what we see. But we name it the same thing, but we're seeing different things. We're perceiving two different things, but we're calling it the same thing.
Yes, that's always a possibility, and that's kind of what he brings up. We can never trust our senses, so we can never really tell anything about the world. But he also does say that the mastery of language separates from possession of abstract general images. So he kind
translate that.
So he differs from the previous philosophers where we
get closer to the microphone. I have a hard time hearing you.
I'm close enough to the mic. I should be.
All right,
okay.
Fine.
Well, I guess our listeners can tweet at us.
Yes.
UL.
All right.
Yeah. So he's kind of saying he differs from the previous philosophers we've talked about. They kind of believe that the general abstract images, that's what kind of ideas are. The things we see in our mind when we hear a word, but he really believes that it's just mastery of language, that is its own separate thing. That's where ideas come from. We don't need this separate term for these general abstract images. It's these, we just understand what we are saying, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I guess it's one way of explaining it.
I guess so. Moving on to Hume on ideas and impressions.
Yes.
So he believed that feeling is a matter of impressions. So that's sensation and emotions, that sort of thing. Whereas thinking involves ideas, which are these mental images that we've heard previously. And so he believed that all ideas are derived from impressions, except for the one counterexample of color. So he believed that in order to know anything, we have to have an impression of that something. And then he makes just one slight exception, and that is color. So he says, a person would be able to tell, to kind of fill in a blank. So you did shades of blue, but one shade was missing. And even though you had never seen that shade of blue before, you could tell from the other blues surrounding it. You could fill in that gap even though you've never seen that blue before. That is the one exception to his rule, he believes, because he believes that everything else, you can't know anything about it unless you've actually had an impression of that thing. And that's all there is to it.
It seems, it's an obvious exception to that rule, but you should have seen that there's a whole lot of other exceptions to that rule, that you can determine things by inference or by drawing conclusions from the evidence around it. But I guess it depends on
where you kind of draw the line of what is a separate thing and what is
right. But I think it's an important distinction when he talks about feelings and thinking, as opposed to what your emotional reaction is, as opposed to logical deduction, I guess.
And he also kind of tries to separate these differences between imagination and memory. So he says that memory is more vivid than imagination, that we can remember things better than we can imagine things. And that's kind of where he gets this whole idea of, everything's dependent on what we've already perceived, because imagination is kind of just a duller, less vivid, less, kind of innovative form of memory, I guess he kind of says in a way.
Do you agree with that?
I do not.
Yeah,
I think memory... I think in a way we can remember things better than they actually were. I think that's a pretty common thing.
Yeah.
But I do not think memory is more vivid than imagination in any way. I think we could do a whole lot more with our imagination than we can with our memory.
I guess it all depends on how good of a memory you have.
Well, he also says that it's kind of based on, he believes that history books are much more entertaining than novels. I guess he must have read some really bad novels in his time.
Or very good histories.
Or better, yes,
I mean,
that's also true.
I tend to agree.
Yeah.
I like history books, or especially like historical biographies. I find those fascinating, just because, as they say, truth is stranger than
There was
fiction.
also another reference to the Lord of the Rings in here. I don't know if you saw that.
Was it?
Yes.
Did I miss it?
It says, kind of in the differences between, what we actually imagine.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It says that the Lord of the Rings is a work of extraordinary imagination, kind of separating, what we imagine.
Right.
It's just a separate thing. Not too important to the overall discussion, but when there's a Lord of the Rings reference, we have to mention that.
I have to mention it. And you have your Lord of the Rings mug precariously perched.
Yes, on the bed. It's filled with Fitz's Cardinal Cream Soda, actually.
That won't stain.
It's bright red. Very naturally so.
All natural ingredients.
Yes. And so then he also goes into this idea that all of our reasonings are founded on cause and effect. So basically everything we do is determined, like I said, on cause and effect. They are two totally different events, and they cannot be inferred from the other only through experience. So we kind of have to experience the cause and effect of everything that happens, and we cannot really infer anything until we've actually seen that cause and that effect. If we see an effect of something, we cannot reasonably infer the cause. If we see a cause, we cannot reasonably infer what is going to happen because of that. And I do not see that at all.
Yeah, I don't either, and I don't know how he explains how people learn things just from reading about them.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have any memory of it and don't have any personal knowledge of it, how do you know it? Maybe he says you don't really know it, I guess.
That's kind of because he goes on.
Assuming that it's true, I guess.
He kind of goes on to just kind of debunk reason, or he tries to debunk reason in and of itself. He says that custom is really what drives human beings, because we really have no way of knowing for certain if everything's going to be the same tomorrow. We have no way of knowing for sure that the world will still exist tomorrow. We're just assuming it is because of our customs that it has in the past, but really there's nothing that guarantees that.
It seems like he'd be a really cool cat to hang out with and get stoned and eat Domino's pizza, because he'd talk about, you can't really know that tomorrow will exist the way it exists today, man, dude.
He's kind of uses this example of, we don't have any guarantee that the sun will rise tomorrow. It's just our customs, previously seeing it rise tomorrow, that we believe it will, but we have no true faith in that, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, I think that's true, but it'd have to have an intervening unexpected cause to stop the sun from, it's not really rising. It's really the orbit of the
Well, who are you to say that there's a cause?
Yeah, I mean,
you can't figure out the cause.
Yeah. No. True.
Oh well.
Just guesswork on my part, because I didn't measure it, and do it.
No. Moving on to Kant and his synthetic a priori.
A priori.
A priori.
That's how I think it's supposed to sound.
It's probably how it's supposed to sound.
Yes.
So Immanuel Kant set up these two different types of knowledge. So he very much liked his categories. He liked to categorize things and put things into lists, and sometimes it gets very, very tedious. So he believed that there was posteriori knowledge, which is derived from experience, and then a priori knowledge, which is independent of all experience. So that's kind of our inherent ideas, our general just ideas about things that we're kind of born with, whereas the other things, posteriori, sure,
yes,
but that's derived from our past experience.
Past
he also
experience.
says...
Yes, it's like it's either theoretical knowledge or knowledge because of the history of it.
Yes.
that you lived it, right?
Mm-hmm. And so he also puts forth these two different types of judgment. Analytic judgment, which is, he uses kind of the framework of B belongs to concept A, and then synthetic judgment is B outside of A, though attached. And so, you're making a really stupid face. He's rolling his eyes over there.
No, my eyes went cross-eyed.
Yeah,
it's outside of itself? I don't know what does that even mean.
So he kind of gives as an example of an analytic judgment, all bodies are extended. So all bodies have some sort of shape. And then synthetic judgment, all bodies...
By definition, a body has to have size. I didn't think that was a really interesting concept.
And then he also says that his synthetic judgment is all bodies are heavy. So he says extension, he explains, is part of the concept body, whereas weight is not. So just because something has shape does not mean that it has weight necessarily. So weight is the thing that is attached to it, but not inherently a part of that. And that's where he separates this distinction.
Well, I guess that's true, because you could have the same shape on outer space and it won't have weight. It'll just have mass.
Yes, that's true.
Ooh. Good
So
point.
he also says that...
Cunt.
Yes, he says that genuine metaphysics is impossible without a priori knowledge of synthetic truths. So what he's saying here is that we need to have kind of this inherent understanding of these judgments that are outside of A, but are attached to A. That didn't make any sense what I said there, but it's kind of saying that, because he's kind of saying that we need to have knowledge of how something kind of works in its entirety, just kind of innate within us, in order to understand metaphysics at all.
Right.
Which is...
Have to understand the concept, or have to have the concept before you can really understand anything. Isn't that what he's really saying?
I think so.
And it's a concept that exists before we think of it.
Yes. And then he also kind of moves on.
I feel like we're getting back to Plato's forums, aren't we?
A little bit.
Yeah, all right.
I know you like those. He also says that senses determine the content of experience, and it is understanding that determines the structure, and both are absolutely necessary to kind of understand anything. So we kind of need to see the environment, we need to look at what's around us, but then we actually kind of need to comprehend that. We need to figure out what's going on to function as a human being, basically, to reason through anything. And he also says that understanding forms complete judgment, said that understanding forms complete ideas while judgment applies them. So understanding...
I did think this was a good point.
So he says that understanding, looking at the things around us, figuring out kind of how they work, that forms our ideas, whereas judgment tells us what to do with them, basically. And I think that is very true, that we need understanding and judgment. It's one thing to understand how things work, and then an entirely different thing to figure out what to do with that information going forward.
Yep, good point.
Yes.
Very good explanation.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I mean, we're 23 episodes in. I feel like I should be better at explaining these philosophical concepts by now.
You've always done a good job.
Oh, thank you.
Very good.
Anyway, talking about...
I thought we were done with Kant.
Yes, we're done with Kant. I'm moving on to realism versus idealism.
All right, excellent.
And so...
I always think we're moving on, and then you have like 10 more minutes to say about people.
Well, yes. Well, this is still Kant. This is still what Kant believes.
Yes, that's true.
In terms of realism and idealism. So he believes that the inner world is better known than the outer world, and that the outer substances of things are inferred from inner experiences. So what he's saying here is that we will always know more about our mind than we do about the world. We can't fully rely on our senses in a way. We can never know everything about the world outside of us, but we can understand ourselves a lot better. And then what we do understand about the world is kind of dependent on what we know about ourselves. So that's kind of like the understanding the judgment concepts.
Right.
In order to fully understand the world, we have to understand how we understand and how we judge things, how to apply those things. So kind of practicing, I guess, kind of those mental virtues, I guess you could say, in order to understand the world around us.
Right.
Yes. And he says that it's impossible for there to be a world of pure senses, and there's impossible to be a world of pure thought-filled intellect. So he's kind of, again, doubling down on that. We can't just sense our way through things. We can't also just think our way through things. So it's kind of this... I don't know if you describe this. This is very realist, I guess he's saying.
I think so.
In the end, he gets down to very much realism in that we do have to rely on our senses, but we will always know more about our mind. So he kind of balances the two realist and idealist principles.
I think you may have mentioned this, but I think an important part of it is where he says that the distinction between appearance and reality is empirical. Your perception of it versus what it really is. You have to measure that empirically through observation and basically the scientific method and that type of thing. But they didn't say the scientific method, but it has to be some sort of empiricism as to what is really out there as opposed to what it appears to be.
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Moving on to idealist epistemology.
Sure.
So the beliefs of the actual idealists here. So first we start off with Fichte. I'd assume that's how you pronounce that. He believed that there is the world of experience is creation of a thinking subject. So the things that we experience is just basically the creation of God. Our experiences are only really there because of God, kind of put into our minds in a way. We're kind of going back to those very old philosophies.
Right.
And, we have to have this sort of discerning material in us, this otherworldly principle that just gives us this understanding of everything that's going on. That's kind of what he boils his idealist principles down to.
I have more and less of an appreciation of the term discernment after going through 2/3 of this book. because it's used often in like church and religious settings, and that kind of stuff. You're just discerning the meaning of things, or your calling.
That's basically all my theology class has been about this semester.
Just discernment?
Yes.
Oh my Lord.
Yeah.
That's a good.
Nice plain words. Yeah.
I always found the history of the Catholic Church to be the most interesting religion class.
We've never had that.
Oh my gosh!
I asked for that actually. I went to our school principal and kind of asked for a separate theology class, almost in a way, because I was kind of, I wouldn't say I was sick of the theology class. I just wanted something more challenging, I guess.
Right.
I don't think many people were on board with my idea.
Probably not.
An honors theology class, you stupid.
Yeah.
I'm like, at least just kind of mix up the topics, because I looked into like what the archdiocese has available for like theology classes, and one of the available ones is like a history of the church class.
The history of the Catholic Church is just fascinating. Especially when you get in like the Middle Ages, and you get like they had 3 popes at one time, and that's crazy stuff. None
of that was taught to us.
Right. I mean, and that's of course it's a little disruptive of people's faith in the Catholic Church and the infallibility of the Pope when Pope's like raping people or whatever.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
In the past, I'm not saying he's doing that now. God knows it wouldn't be a woman, but
Jesus. Way to absolutely peak the microphone and destroy the ears of anyone listening.
Well, they probably turned it off before.
Oh, well, yeah, of course.
Well, said, our one French listener is like, right on, down with the Catholic Church.
And now he is no longer listening. So then, moving on within this idealist epistemology, we look at Hegel.
Hegel?
Hegel.
It's not Hegel. It's Hegel.
Hegel.
Hegel. No, it's not the same.
Okay.
Hegel.
So he believed that immediate sense awareness is the thinnest and emptiest level of consciousness. So that's basically the least developed, form of thinking, is just looking at our senses, looking at what's around us, and kind of figuring that out. It kind of says it's kind of in the place of animals. That's what animals do. Yeah. So it's the thinnest form of consciousness, the most basic. And then he believed that the laws of nature are the creation of understanding itself. So I guess what he's kind of saying there is that, when we looked at the world, we tried to figure things out. That was kind of our understanding of the world is what put these laws of nature into place. There's no sort of external being that put these laws of nature into place. We just looked at the world. We understood these parts of it. That is our laws of nature.
Yeah. So where do you, are you done discussing that? I was going to ask you I
was going to say consciousness and self-consciousness yield a higher faculty of reason. So he also believed that, we have to be conscious of the outside world, be conscious of our inside world. That's how we reason.
I think that was implied from the first concept.
Probably.
Yes. So where do you come down on the, what you can know and how you can know, and what's the most important or dominant level of consciousness? If you understand, if I am asking the question correctly.
So I think I talked about this earlier in this episode, in that, if we, there's really no way to prove that anything else exists, really, besides my own mind, because that's just me. But it doesn't really matter if I can or cannot prove that. I don't think that's really of importance, because if nothing else exists, then I might as well just keep doing what I'm doing. If everything else exists, then I should absolutely keep doing what I'm doing, because,
I think you can. I think these guys are overthinking it in a way, because I guess you'd say it depends on what your level of certainty is. In life, we all go through routines, and we know. Well, like for instance, if we put our foot on the gas pedal, it's going to go unless it breaks or whatever. But there are certain expectations in the daily life. We know the sun's going to rise and the sun's going to set. And we know that through observation, and then if we really want to delve into it, if we want to know any fact with some reliability, no matter how small it is, I think you can get to a point through empirical study and being able to recreate an experiment. I think that's a big thing in the scientific method is like I can do the same, I hold true for the same factors. I can recreate those circumstances in the resulting experiment. And I think, on some level, I guess I'd say, okay, well, I can only really know that I know myself, because the rest of it can be a figment of my imagination or something else. But like you said, it kind of loses its meaning. Because what's the point? If that's the case, then I might as well just try to understand the system that I perceive.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking is like, that's kind of what I was getting to, is that, it doesn't really matter if we can really prove if our senses work. We kind of just have to kind of just move forward with the assumption that they are correct, that the world
Right.
that I perceive is correct,
Right.
because
To a
what's the
certain
what's
level.
the what's the point otherwise? We
Right.
kind of have to set that baseline. I get you can't exactly 100% prove with certainty whether or not I can trust my senses, but in order to get anything meaningful done, we
Right.
just have to kind of operate with that assumption.
Correct.
So that's kind of where I operate. It's very, I guess, realistic in that, just rely on your senses. Doesn't really matter if you can prove if they work or not, because what's the point?
Yeah, and I don't personally think that this area of inquiry is that important.
I mean, you mentioned that. Yeah,
I think
this
it
is what
is-
you
it is
lost your
important.
interest in.
Yeah,
studying philosophy.
it's interesting as kind of like a theoretical discussion of what do you really know in life. I think it's more interesting when you apply it to morality and ethics. How do you know what is right in that context? But the rest of it is just kind of like, we know what you know.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing is what you can verify through accepted sources, and it just I believe that knowledge just builds through history, and we should always question what people hold true, but it's at some sort of basic level you have to have certain assumptions in life.
Yes.
Whether it's like a half a dozen or so main assumptions, you just got to live with it.
Absolutely agree.
Otherwise, you're just wasting time, and you're spinning your wheels. You're not achieving anything.
Yeah.
All right, we're on the same page on knowledge.
Yes, we are on the same page.
Epistemology.
Epistemology. Yep, absolutely. All right. Well, this has been episode 23 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I am still Mark Bishop.
And you can still follow us on Twitter at capital U, lowercase LMTD, capital O, lowercase PINIONS.
And this episode is a week late to
Yes,
being
this episode is a
posted,
week late.
and we still don't have a winner of our.
We do not.
Make
This
an
is the
interesting
longest
comment.
running. Yeah, I guess we can kind of tell the story here for a little bit of why this episode is late. Ran out of storage completely on my Microsoft Surface because I realized I still had the Audacity project files still there. They were like 115 gigabytes.
I believe I just fell asleep.
Yeah. Well, if there's any tech guys out there, any suggestions for cutting down the amount of space I'm using on this thing? So I just kept the MP3 files.
They'll say that get more storage.
Yeah,
That's what they would
it's
say.
a good solution.
Yes.
All right.
We done?
We are done.
Good night.